He didn't fight back. That was the part nobody understood. A man with hands steady enough to disarm a charge underwater, calm enough to hold a perimeter in the dark, while everything around him collapsed, and he just stood there, letting the coffee drip from his jacket while a room full of suits laughed at him. Logan Hayes had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing a man could do was show exactly what he was capable of. They had no idea. Not one of them. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where the quiet ones finally get their moment, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Smash that like button and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened inside Sterling Grounds that Tuesday morning changed everything. The toolbox was the wrong kind of heavy. Most people who carried tools for a living developed a certain efficiency about it. The right bag, the right straps, weight distributed so your shoulder didn't scream by noon. Logan Hayes had never bothered. He used the same steel-latched box he'd bought secondhand 11 years ago, and he carried it the way he carried most things. Without complaint, without explanation, one hand gripping the worn handle while the other held a folded piece of paper with the morning's work orders. He pushed through the front door of Sterling Grounds' downtown flagship location at 6:53 on a Tuesday morning. The cafe wasn't open to the public yet. The lights were on, the brutal overhead kind that made everyone look like they hadn't slept, and the smell hit him the moment he stepped inside. Coffee. Not the complicated boutique kind that the menu described in 3-sentence paragraphs, but the honest version underneath all of that. Roasted bean and steam, and something almost sweet. The smell of something that actually worked. He stood there for exactly 1 second. Then he crossed the floor toward the back, where the service corridor led to the equipment room, and tried not to look at anything too long. The cafe was what the company called its crown jewel. Soaring ceilings, reclaimed wood, copper fixtures, the kind of industrial aesthetic that cost a significant amount of money to look like. It hadn't cost anything. There were exposed pipes that weren't functional, and Edison bulbs that dimmed on a schedule and a menu board written in chalk by someone paid specifically to make it look imperfect. Logan had walked past this location 100 times over the past 8 months without going inside. He knew the layout from memory. He'd helped design the original floor plan 14 years ago, before any of this existed, when the flagship was a 600-square-foot corner shop with mismatched chairs and a roasting drum that occasionally filled the back room with smoke. That version of Sterling Grounds was gone. He wasn't sure what this version was. He found the equipment room without needing to ask directions and set the toolbox on the floor beside the central roasting panel. The work order said routine calibration check, boiler pressure assessment, secondary thermostat inspection. Standard stuff. The kind of job you handed to someone you trusted with access but didn't need to impress. He opened the toolbox and got to work. For 20 minutes, no one bothered him. Then the morning shift arrived. He heard them before he saw them. A cluster of voices in the corridor, sharp and carrying, the particular confidence of people who had been allowed to be loud for too long. Logan kept his focus on the secondary thermostat housing, running a calibration check with a digital probe, noting the reading in his head. The reading was off. Not dramatically, not something that would trigger an alert, but off enough that it shouldn't have passed the last inspection. He made a note on the work order, underlined it. "Hey." Logan looked up. The man standing in the equipment room doorway was somewhere in his mid-40s, with the build of someone who'd been athletic in his 30s and had since converted that frame into something softer around the edges. He wore a jacket that was probably Italian and a watch that was definitely Swiss, and he was looking at Logan the way some men look at things that are in their way. Damian Crawford, Regional Director, Sterling Grounds Pacific Division. Logan knew who he was. He'd done his homework. "This room is supposed to be cleared before executive arrival," Crawford said. Logan set the probe down carefully. "Work order has me here until 8:15. Boiler assessment runs 40 minutes minimum if you want accurate readings." "I don't care about the work order," Crawford stepped into the room. "I have a site walk with the acquisition team in 30 minutes, and I need this space presentable. Pack your stuff up." Logan looked at him steadily. "The boiler assessment is safety critical. If I leave now, you'll need to shut the system down before—" "Did I ask for a lesson?" Crawford's voice dropped into something that wasn't quite a shout, but was working toward it. "Your maintenance staff. I'm telling you to move. That's how this works. Logan held the man's gaze for a moment. There was a particular quality to Crawford's impatience. Not the urgency of someone with a real problem, but the irritation of someone who needed to establish the order of things. Logan had met this type before, in briefing rooms and command structures in places far more consequential than this, the ones who confused authority with intelligence. "All right," Logan said. He began closing up the toolbox. Methodical. Not rushed. Crawford watched him like he was waiting for an apology that wasn't coming. What? The main floor of the cafe had filled in the meantime. A handful of baristas were setting up stations, and a cluster of people in business attire, the acquisition team, Logan assumed, plus Sterling Ground's regional staff, were gathered near the long counter, speaking in the half-social, half-performative way that happens before important meetings begin. Logan came through the corridor door carrying his toolbox, work order folded in his breast pocket. He was angling toward the side exit when Crawford came up behind him, faster than Logan expected, and put a hand flat on Logan's shoulder blade and pushed. Not a punch, not a shove, exactly. The kind of push that a certain type of person delivers when they want the result of violence without the liability of it. Logan's shoulder hit the glass display counter. The toolbox hit the floor. And the cup of coffee that one of the baristas had just set at the end of the counter went sideways, and the entire thing, cup, lid, dark roast, all of it, came down across Logan's jacket. The room went quiet for about half a second. Then someone laughed. It was short and involuntary, the way laughter sometimes escapes before a person decides whether it's appropriate. But once it started, a few others followed, and the tension in the room collapsed into something worse than tension: amusement. Logan stood still. Hot coffee had soaked through his jacket and was working through to his shirt. He could feel it across his left shoulder and down his side. He looked at the coffee dripping from his sleeve. He looked at Crawford, who was already turning away, dismissing him the way you dismiss something that's been dealt with. Logan didn't move for a moment. He was doing something the room couldn't see. He was counting, not from anger. Anger was a resource, and you didn't spend resources without a reason. He was counting because counting was something he'd learned to do in situations where every instinct said to act and every ounce of training said to wait. Wait. Read. Understand what's actually in front of you before you decide what to do about it. Crawford was laughing now at something one of the other executives had said. His back was to Logan. Logan bent down, picked up the toolbox, and walked to the side counter where he set it down and began looking for paper towels. One of the younger baristas, a woman in her early 20s with dark hair and the expression of someone who'd watched this kind of thing happen before and hated it every time, appeared beside him with a stack of napkins. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. She meant it. "Not your fault." Logan took the napkins and started working on the jacket. It wasn't going to do much, but you do what you can. "He does that," she said, even quieter. Logan glanced at her. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't need to. I was still at the counter when the front door opened. He heard the change in the room before he looked up. Not loud, not dramatic, but the specific shift that happens when someone walks into a space who actually controls it. Conversations cut short. Posture adjusted. The kind of involuntary recalibration that authority produces in people who understand where they sit in a hierarchy. Victoria Sterling was 30 years old, and she was clearly her father's daughter in the architecture of her face and almost nothing else. Where James Sterling had been loud and expansive and built for a room full of people, his daughter was precise. She wore a gray suit that fit exactly and carried nothing. No bag, no phone visible, no props of any kind. She had the particular composure of someone who'd spent years having to prove that composure wasn't a performance. She paused inside the door. Her eyes moved across the room with the quick efficiency of someone trained to notice what's wrong. They landed on Logan, on the coffee-soaked jacket, on Damian Crawford, who was already moving to intercept her with his hand extended and his best morning meeting energy assembled. "Victoria." Crawford's voice was warm and practiced. "Good timing. We were just—" "Damian." She didn't take his hand. Her eyes were still on Logan. "Give me a minute." Crawford's arm dropped. His expression didn't change fast enough to hide the brief flash of irritation underneath. Victoria crossed the floor toward Logan. She stopped when she was close enough to speak at a normal volume and not be overheard. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't an accusatory question. It was the question of someone who wanted to know the actual answer. Accident, Logan said. Her eyes were steady on his. She knew it wasn't an accident. He knew she knew. She nodded slowly, not agreeing with the word, just acknowledging that he'd chosen it deliberately. Logan. She said his name the way you say the name of someone you've been looking for. I'm glad you came. Crawford had drifted closer. Not close enough to hear the words, but close enough to demonstrate that he expected to be included in whatever this was. Victoria, he said again, lighter this time, a question folded inside the name. Do you know this? Do you know him? She turned to look at Crawford, and the temperature of her voice dropped by several degrees. Damien, she said, I'd like you to introduce Logan Hayes to the acquisition team. Crawford's brow creased. He glanced at Logan, at the wet jacket, at the toolbox sitting on the counter. Something wasn't computing. I'm sorry? Logan Hayes, Victoria said again, clearly for the room, and several conversations nearby went quiet. Co-founder of Sterling Grounds, holder of 17.3% of the company's founding shares, which, as the acquisition documents you reviewed last week will confirm, carry full voting rights at any board proceeding and supersede regional executive authority in operational matters. The room was very still. Crawford's face did something complicated. The certainty drained out of it in stages like water finding a drain. Crawford started. He's the reason, Victoria said, that this company exists. She let that sit for a moment. Logan, for his part, was watching Crawford. Not with satisfaction. That wasn't what this was. He was watching Crawford the way he used to watch a new environment when he first entered it, cataloging, measuring, reading the tells. The way Crawford's jaw had set, the way his eyes had gone slightly flat, the way his hands, at his sides, had stopped moving. A certain kind of man, when cornered, went quiet and still and waited. Logan had seen it before. It was never a good sign. The acquisition team was introduced to Logan Hayes with the particular awkwardness of people who've just been caught in something and aren't sure how bad it is. Handshakes were extended. Names were offered. The senior partner from the investment firm, a man named Holt with silver hair and the handshake of a man who'd made a career projecting stability, looked Logan in the eye and said he'd heard the name. The original roasting system, Holt said. Part of it, Logan said. We've built our entire valuation model around the roasting output efficiency, Holt said. There was something under the professional tone, not quite concern, but the beginning of it. The technology. I know, Logan said. There was a pause. And that system, Holt said carefully, is in good working order? Logan looked at him for a moment. He thought about the thermostat reading, the calibration that had failed inspection and shouldn't have, the number he'd underlined on the work order still folded in his breast pocket, under coffee-stained fabric. I'm going to need to complete my assessment, Logan said. That wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Victoria found him in the equipment room 40 minutes later. He was on the floor beside the roasting panel with a flashlight and the access panel open, looking at something he wasn't supposed to be able to see with the system running. But Logan had spent 3 years studying this system's architecture before the company had the budget to build it, and he knew where to look. She crouched beside him. Didn't ask what he was doing, just looked. When did the calibration log start showing drift? He said. 6 weeks ago, she said. I didn't know what I was looking at. Most people wouldn't. He moved the flashlight. This. She leaned in. He was pointing at a secondary relay housing, a component that, to most eyes, would look exactly as it should. To Logan, it looked like something that had been carefully, deliberately, and very skillfully adjusted. That's not a malfunction, she said slowly. No. That's someone who knows this system, Logan said, or paid someone who does. A silence settled between them. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind between two people who've both just understood something they were hoping wasn't true. The acquisition ceremony, Victoria said. It's in 9 days. Logan clicked the flashlight off. In the dark, the hum of the machines felt different, heavier. I know, he said. If the system fails I know. She exhaled. He could hear it, controlled, but barely. Logan, I went looking for you because I had a feeling something was wrong inside this company. I didn't expect you thought it was financial, he said. I thought it was Damien moving money, shell accounts, inflated contracts. I have paperwork that suggests it's both, Logan said. He picked up the flashlight, turned it over in his hands. The sabotage and the money, they're connected. One person doesn't do both. That's coordination. She was quiet for a moment. What do you need? She said. Logan set the flashlight in the toolbox, closed the lid, stood up, and for the first time since walking into this building that morning, he let himself look at the room around him. The original infrastructure, the pipes he'd spec'd, the panel layout he'd drafted on graph paper at a kitchen table when Ava was still an infant and his wife was still alive. And Sterling Grounds was a dream that two people were building together with their hands. It looked different now, bigger, colder, but the bones were still his. I need to act like nothing has changed, he said. I need Crawford to believe he still controls this building. Victoria looked at him carefully. And then? Logan picked up the toolbox. Then, he said, we find out exactly how deep this goes. He left through the side exit at 9:30. The coffee on his jacket had dried into a stiff, darker shadow along his left side. The work order in his breast pocket had 4 items underlined now, not one, and 2 of them were things he hadn't come here expecting to find. He walked 2 blocks to where his truck was parked, put the toolbox in the bed, and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine. Through the windshield, the city moved in its ordinary morning way. People on phones, a delivery truck blocking a lane, pigeons rearranging themselves on a ledge. He thought about Ava. She'd be at school now, probably in second period, probably bored because she was always 10 minutes ahead of wherever the class was. She texted him at lunch most days. Sometimes just a single word, boring. And he would respond with hang in there and she'd send back a thumbs down. He was the only parent she had, and he was going to spend the next several days walking back into a building that someone had turned into a trap. He thought about that for a moment. Then he started the truck and pulled into traffic. He drove home, showered, changed his jacket, and made a sandwich he didn't finish. That was how Logan processed things. Not by sitting still and thinking, but by moving through ordinary tasks while his mind worked underneath. He'd been this way since his 20s, since the Navy had taught him that clarity didn't come from stillness. It came from letting your hands do something simple while the deeper part of your brain sorted through what it had collected. He washed the coffee-stained jacket in the sink. He hung it over the shower rod. He stood at the kitchen window and ate half the sandwich and looked out at the narrow strip of backyard where Ava had left her bicycle leaning against the fence, rear tire still slightly soft because she kept forgetting to ask him to fill it. He should fill it today. She'd need it this weekend. He pulled out the work order and spread it flat on the kitchen table. 4 underlines. 2 of them were standard findings: the thermostat drift, a pressure irregularity in the secondary boiler line that could be explained by age and use. The other 2 were different. The secondary relay housing he'd shown Victoria. And something else, something he hadn't mentioned yet because he wasn't sure enough. A software interface panel on the roasting system's control board that had a label indicating firmware version 3.2, when Logan knew, because he'd been one of 3 people who built the system, that the panel's architecture couldn't run anything past version 2.7 without physical hardware modification. Someone had modified the hardware, and then covered it with a label. It was the kind of detail that required knowing the system very well, not just operating it, knowing it the way you know something you helped create. Logan sat down at the table and stared at that underline for a long time. Then he got up, went to the spare bedroom that he used as a home office, pulled a filing box from the bottom shelf of the closet, and started going through paperwork he hadn't touched in 4 years. The original Sterling Grounds technical documentation. His copies, the ones he'd made before everything fell apart, before the lawyers and the silence agreement and the years of letting it go because fighting it would have cost him the one thing he couldn't afford to lose time on. Ava had been 8 when the company had quietly restructured his role into irrelevance. 8 years old and still waking up some nights calling for her mother. He hadn't had the energy left for a legal fight. He'd signed what they put in front of him, kept his shares because the attorney he'd managed to afford told him they were worth keeping, and walked away. He found what he was looking for 20 minutes into the box. A technical schematic, hand-annotated, dated 14 years ago. His handwriting on the margins. His modifications in red pen. The relay housing design, the control board specs, the firmware version architecture. Version 2.7 was the ceiling. He'd written it himself, right there in the margin, and circled it. Whatever was running in that building now had been put there by someone who had access to the original schematics. He photographed the page with his phone and sent it to Victoria without a message. She'd know what she was looking at. Her response came back in 4 minutes. "Where did you get this?" He typed, "I drew it." A pause. Then, "We need to talk tonight. Not at the building." He typed back, "I know a place. Book it." The diner was called Patsy's, and it had been there since before either of them were born. It was the kind of place that didn't have a website, served coffee in ceramic mugs that had been through a dishwasher 10,000 times, and kept the lights at a level that was technically bright enough to read a menu but discouraged anyone from looking too closely at anything. Logan had discovered it during the first winter after Rachel died, when Ava was with his sister for a week, and he'd needed somewhere to sit that wasn't the apartment. He'd come back most weeks since then. The woman who worked the counter, a heavy-set woman named Gloria, who wore her gray hair in a bun and had never once asked Logan anything personal, always brought his coffee without him ordering it. She brought 2 cups tonight, looked at Victoria once, said nothing, and left them to it. Victoria had come in a plain coat with her hair down. She looked younger than she had in the cafe that morning, and also more tired, like she'd spent the hours in between carrying something heavy and had only just been able to set it down. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the schematic photograph Logan had sent her, which she'd printed and brought folded in her coat pocket. "This is your handwriting," she said. "Yes." "And this notation," she pointed, "version ceiling, you wrote this as a constraint?" The hardware at the time couldn't handle the thermal load that a higher firmware version would demand. It was a safety issue. If you pushed the system past 2.7, the relay housing would overheat under sustained operation. He paused. "Which is what someone has now modified it to do." She looked up from the paper. "If it overheats," she said carefully, "during the acquisition ceremony. Best case, the system shuts down during the event. Worst case, the thermal failure cascades into the boiler line." He picked up his coffee. "The flagship store has a mezzanine level, seating for 40, plus staff." Victoria set the paper down. She pressed her fingertips flat against the table. He could see her processing it. Not the fear part. She was pushing past the fear part, straight into what needs to happen. "How long do we have?" she said. "The ceremony is 9 days out. The system would need to be running at full capacity for at least 6 hours to trigger failure under the modified configuration." He set the mug down. "My guess is whoever did this planned for it to happen during the event itself. Full house, press present, acquisition team on site." "It would destroy the deal," she said. "It would destroy the company," he said. "A safety failure at the flagship during a nationally covered acquisition event. That's not something you recover from. Liability, investigation, the investors walk, the board fractures." He looked at her. "Is that what someone wants? Or is this financial piece the main event, and this is just insurance?" She exhaled. "Damien has been running the Pacific Division for 6 years. I've been going through the books for the past 3 weeks since I started finding inconsistencies. Vendor contracts where the invoiced amounts don't match our actual service records. A maintenance company that received $240,000 in payments over 18 months and appears, as far as I can tell, to not exist." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Name of the maintenance company?" "Apex Facility Services. There's a business registration in the state, filed 2 years ago, an address that turns out to be a mail forwarding center in Phoenix. The registered agent is a name I can't find any other record of. Bank account? Routed through a management LLC that lists Apex as a client. I have a partial trace. It gets complicated after the second layer." She looked slightly frustrated. The particular frustration of someone who is very good at what they do encountering a problem deliberately designed to stop someone very good at what they do. "I'm not an accountant. I understand financial structure well enough to know something is wrong and not well enough to prove it completely." "I know someone," Logan said. She raised an eyebrow. "Former Navy," he said by way of explanation. "She does forensic financial work now, consulting, mostly for defense contractors, but she takes other cases." He paused. "She owes me a favor." Victoria looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression that he'd noticed earlier in the day. A quality of reassessment, like she was adjusting the scale of something she'd initially underestimated. He wasn't sure whether he found that flattering or slightly irritating. Okay, she said. What else do you need? Access, he said, to the building after hours, to the server infrastructure, to Damian Crawford's operational records, expense reports, vendor authorizations, anything he signs off on. I can get you most of that. The server access is complicated. He has executive credentials that restrict certain directories. That's fine, Logan said. I don't want his credentials. I want to know what he does with them. She looked at him steadily. You want to watch him? I want to let him make a mistake, Logan said. Those are different things. Gloria appeared to refill the coffees. She looked at Victoria, then at Logan, with the neutral expression of a woman who had seen every variety of late-night conversation over 30 years of working a diner counter and had learned to classify them quickly. She refilled both cups and left without a word. Victoria turned the schematic over in her hands. My father trusted Damien, she said. It wasn't an accusation, not at Damien, not at her father. It was just a fact that she was holding up to the light and looking at. He brought him in 8 years ago, gave him the regional role, pushed for the expanded authority. Dad thought he used to call him a builder, someone who got things done. People like Crawford are good at the early phase, Logan said. They're good at showing results when someone's watching. The problem is what they do when no one is. She was quiet for a moment. What changed? Why is this happening now? The acquisition, Logan said. $1 billion acquisition is a deadline. If Crawford has been running money through shell vendors for years, the acquisition due diligence is a problem. The acquiring firm is going to want clean books. Forensic level clean. He turned the mug in his hands. He's not trying to destroy the company. He's trying to destroy the evidence. The sabotage is a distraction or a backup. If the deal falls through in a spectacular enough way, the investigation focuses on the failure, not on the 6 years of payroll fraud that preceded it, Victoria said very quietly. Payroll fraud. Logan nodded. The maintenance company payments are the visible layer. Underneath that, I'd look at employee wage records. Overtime reporting, benefits contributions, the gap between what the company says it pays hourly staff and what actually clears in their accounts. He looked at her. The flagship employs 63 people. If Crawford has been skimming from wage reports, even small amounts per employee, but over 6 years across the whole Pacific Division, that's thousands of people, she said. Yes. She looked at the table. When she looked back up, something had shifted in her face. The CEO calibration, the composed professional distance. It was still there, but underneath it was something more personal, something that had decided something. Those people work for this company, she said. Some of them have been here since before I took over. I know. We need to prove all of it, she said. Not just enough to remove Damien, enough to get every one of those people what they're owed. Logan looked at her for a long moment. He'd come back to Sterling Grounds because she'd found him, tracked him down through the original share documentation, and shown up at his door 3 weeks ago with a manila folder and the particular directness of someone who had run out of safe options. He'd agreed to come back because the sabotage risk was real, and he was the only person who understood the system well enough to assess it. He hadn't expected to find much else that surprised him. He was mildly surprised. All right, he said. He started the next morning before dawn. The building access Victoria had arranged was tagged as an extended maintenance window. Nothing that would raise flags on the operations log. Just a notation that equipment assessment was ongoing through the week. Logan arrived at 4:45 with the toolbox and a laptop in a backpack and let himself in through the service entrance with the key card she'd left for him in an envelope in his truck. The building in the pre-dawn hours was a different thing. The heating system cycled. The refrigeration units in the back bar hummed at their constant pitch. The city noise was reduced to its ambient layer, distant traffic, the occasional delivery vehicle, wind moving through the gap between this building and the one next to it. Logan had always thought better in early mornings. Rachel used to say he was part bat, couldn't see anything until the rest of the world went quiet. He went to the equipment room first. He needed baseline data before he started looking at anything else, actual operational readings across a full thermal cycle, not spot measurements. He connected his laptop to the system's diagnostic port and set it running, then spent 40 minutes doing a physical inspection of every accessible component in the room. He moved slowly and carefully, checking each connection, each seal, each piece of hardware that could have been altered. He made notes in a small spiral notebook. Not on the laptop, not in any file that connected to a network. Paper. Old habit. What he found over those 40 minutes was more than he'd expected. The relay housing modification was deliberate and skilled, but it wasn't the only one. Someone had also adjusted the thermal cutoff sensor on the primary boiler line, not disabled it, that would have shown up immediately, but repositioned it by approximately 3 centimeters, enough to ensure it read a temperature slightly lower than actual, enough that by the time the system reached a genuinely dangerous heat level, the sensor would still be reporting normal. And in the control board, behind the panel with the wrong firmware label, there was a secondary circuit board, small, about the size of a paperback book, that Logan didn't recognize and hadn't designed. He photographed it from 4 angles without touching it. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at it for a moment. A secondary board meant a secondary control signal, something that could receive an input and modify system behavior without appearing in the standard operational logs. It was, in the vocabulary of his old work, a trigger mechanism. The failure wasn't going to happen by accident or over time. It was going to happen when someone sent a signal, someone who planned to be there. He photographed the board again, got up, and went to find the server room. Sterling Ground's flagship IT infrastructure was modest by corporate standards. The company ran most of its cloud operations through external managed services. But the on-site server rack handled the operational network, the security systems, the POS platform, and the executive communications relay that Crawford's office had insisted on installing 18 months ago. Logan found the rack in a locked room off the main corridor, behind a door that required a separate keycard that Victoria had included in the envelope. He didn't touch the servers. What he did was connect a small network monitoring device, the size of a thumb drive purchased 2 days ago under a name that wasn't his, to the rack's management port. The device would log all network activity in and out of the rack for the next 72 hours. Every login, every access attempt, every file transfer. He was in and out of the server room in 6 minutes. The rest of the morning he spent in the equipment room, running his diagnostic and reading the outputs and writing things in his notebook. By 7:15, when the morning shift was due to arrive, he had packed up the laptop, pocketed the notebook, and returned to looking exactly like a maintenance worker doing routine assessment. The barista with the dark hair, he'd learned her name was Priya, came in at 7:30 with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "You're here early," she said, "trying to get the assessment done before the cafe gets busy," he said. She leaned against the doorframe. She had the slightly faded look of someone working a morning shift after a closing shift, and she was drinking her coffee with the efficiency of someone who needed it to function, not enjoy it. "Is it true?" she said. "What she said yesterday, about you being a founder." Logan looked at the diagnostic screen. "Co-founder. There were 2 of us originally. Who was the other one?" He was quiet for a moment. "My wife." Priya looked at him. She didn't say "I'm sorry" the way most people did, reflexively, as punctuation, and he appreciated that. She just nodded slightly and drank her coffee. "The coffee's good," he said, meaning it. "I do the morning blend myself," she said. "They have a standard protocol, but I adjust the grind time based on the humidity. The system's sensitive to atmospheric moisture. The extraction pulls differently on humid days." She paused, slightly self-conscious. "The system. Your system, I guess." "The grind adjustment is right," he said. "That's in the original operating notes, but most people skip it." He looked at her. "How long have you been here?" 4 years. "You like it?" She considered the question seriously instead of answering automatically. "I like the work. I like the regulars. I don't like—" She stopped. "Crawford," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "How long has he been running things the way he runs them?" Logan said. It was a careful question, not interrogation, just the tone of someone who actually wanted to know. "Since before I started," she said. "But it got worse after Mr. Sterling passed, about 3 years ago. The overtime reporting changed. The way vendor issues get handled changed." She looked at her coffee. "2 people I know filed HR complaints about wage discrepancies. Both of them were gone within a month." "Gone how?" "One resigned. One was terminated for performance issues." She said the last 2 words with the slight flatness of someone quoting language they don't believe. "Neither of them had performance issues." Logan wrote nothing down. He kept his face neutral. But something in his chest registered what she'd said with the particular weight of confirmation, the moment when a suspicion becomes something harder. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. She pushed off the doorframe. "Don't let Crawford see you talking to me," she said. "He doesn't like it when staff talk to contractors." A beat. "Or whoever you are now." She left. Logan looked at the diagnostic screen and let the morning settle around him. By midday, he had enough to start building the picture. He met Victoria in a parking structure 3 blocks from the building at 12:30. She came down the stairwell from the second level, and they stood between his truck and a concrete pillar, talking in the particular low-register way of people who'd learned the difference between privacy and secrecy. He showed her the photographs of the secondary circuit board. She looked at them for a long time. "What does it do?" "It's a remote trigger. Someone can send a signal. Could be cellular, could be Wi-Fi. And it tells the system to override the thermal cutoff and run at maximum load." He put the phone in his pocket. "It would look like a system malfunction. By the time anyone realized it wasn't, the damage would be done." "Is it active now?" "I didn't want to disturb it. If whoever installed it checks on it remotely and finds it's been touched, we lose the advantage." She nodded slowly. She was getting good at the logic of this, not just receiving information, but thinking 2 steps ahead. He noticed that about her. She didn't have a military background and she'd never worked anything like an investigation, but she had the structural thinking of someone who was used to managing complex systems, and she was applying it in a direction she'd never applied it before. "The network monitor is running," she said, "since 5 this morning. And the financial trace? I sent the Apex Facility Services information to my contact last night. She called me at 7 this morning." He paused. "She found 4 additional shell entities linked to the same registered agent. Total payments across all 5 companies over 6 years. Approximately $1.4 million. Victoria was very still. "And she found something else," Logan said. "The payroll processor for the Pacific Division runs through a third-party HR platform. Damian Crawford is the administrator. For the past 4 years, he's been filing overtime reimbursement claims on behalf of hourly staff. But the reimbursement amounts that reach the employees are roughly 12 to 15% lower than what's filed. He's taking the difference," she said. "Through an account that routes back to one of the shell entities, yes." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. Not dramatically, just the gesture of someone recalibrating. "How many employees?" "Pacific Division has roughly 800 hourly workers across 23 locations," Logan said. "If the skimming rate is consistent across the division, and my contact thinks it is, we're talking about 4 to 5 years of wage theft from several hundred people." The parking structure was quiet, except for a car moving on the level above them, tires on concrete, the sound diminishing as it found a space. "He's been stealing from the baristas," Victoria said. She said it simply, without inflection, like she was making sure she understood it correctly. "Yes." She looked at the floor. When she looked up, her expression had settled into something that wasn't anger exactly, but was adjacent to it. The controlled, directed version of anger that in Logan's experience was more dangerous than the loud kind. "What do we do with it?" she said. "When we have everything?" "We don't go to the board yet," Logan said. "If Crawford gets wind that the investigation is further along than he thinks, if he panics early, he could trigger the system remotely and take the evidence with the explosion." He watched her face. "I need him calm. I need him to believe he's ahead of this." "You said you wanted to let him make a mistake." "I want to give him the opportunity to make a specific mistake," Logan said. "One that's undeniable." She understood. He could see it. She didn't ask him to elaborate. She trusted that he'd explain when there was something to explain. 9 days, she said. 8 now, he said. She started back toward the stairwell, stopped, turned around. "The woman at the end of the counter this morning," she said. "Priya." "Yes." "She's been there 4 years. She's one of the good ones." Victoria looked at him steadily. "Whatever we do, she doesn't get caught in it." "None of them do," Logan said. "That's the point." She nodded. Then she went up the stairs and was gone. Logan stood in the parking structure for a moment. Outside, at the level of the street, the city carried on its midday pace. Somewhere a bus announced a stop. Someone honked once, short, frustrated, and then it was quiet again. He thought about Ava. She got out of school at 3:15. He told her he was doing some work this week and might be home later than usual. She'd given him the look she'd developed in the past year. Not quite teenager, not quite little kid, something in between. The look that meant she knew something was going on and had decided to trust him about it. He didn't deserve that trust automatically. He knew that. It had to be earned every day. He got in the truck and drove back toward the building. There was still a full afternoon of work ahead, and he'd learned enough this morning to know that whoever had set the trap inside Sterling grounds had known exactly what they were doing, which meant the dismantling of it would have to be just as careful, just as exact, and completely invisible until it was time to be otherwise. The network monitor was running. The financial trace was underway. And Damian Crawford was somewhere in that building right now, going about his day, believing he was the most dangerous person in the room. Logan had spent years working in environments where that particular belief got people killed. He wasn't going to let it happen here. The network monitor ran for 72 hours before Logan pulled it. He retrieved it on a Thursday morning, early enough that the building was still in that pre-shift quiet, the heating system cycling through its morning sequence, the refrigeration units running their low constant note. He was in and out of the server room in under 4 minutes. Back in the equipment room, he connected the device to his laptop and started reading the logs while the diagnostic program ran its morning cycle on the roasting system. The logs were long. Most of it was routine, POS systems syncing overnight, security camera feeds uploading to cloud storage, the managed services platform running its scheduled maintenance. He filtered out the known traffic signatures and looked at what was left. There were 3 anomalies. The first was a login to the Executive Communications Relay at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, 2 days ago, using Damian Crawford's credentials. The session lasted 22 minutes. During that session, 11 files were accessed in a directory Logan didn't have visibility into, and 4 of them were downloaded to an external device. The second was an outbound data transfer at 2:13 a.m. on Wednesday, small file size, encrypted. Destination address resolved to a server registered to a legal services firm in Nevada. The third was a remote access attempt on the roasting system's secondary control board, the board with the trigger mechanism, at 4:50 a.m. on Wednesday morning. The attempt used a frequency Logan's monitor had flagged as cellular. It lasted 40 seconds. Nothing in the system's standard operational logs showed any record of it. Logan sat with that for a moment. Crawford had pinged the trigger, not activated it. Just checked that it was still responsive. The way you check a weapon before a job, making sure it still works. He photographed the log data, closed the laptop, and texted Victoria a single word: tonight. They met at Patsy's again. Gloria brought the coffees without being asked, and this time left a slice of pie on the table that neither of them had ordered, which Logan suspected was her version of acknowledging that something serious was happening without wanting to know what. Victoria came in looking like she'd slept about 4 hours, which she probably had. She'd been managing the acquisition team's daily requests on top of everything else. The due diligence questions, the schedule confirmations, the carefully maintained performance of a company that was proceeding normally toward a milestone event. Logan didn't know how she was sustaining it and didn't ask because the answer was probably something like barely. He showed her the log data. She read it twice. He checked the trigger, she said. Yes. 2 days ago. Yes. She looked at the pie. She picked up a fork, considered it, put it back down. He's planning to use it during the ceremony. That's my read, Logan said. The ceremony is the moment of maximum exposure. Press, investors, board members, acquisition leadership. If the system fails, then, catastrophically enough, the deal collapses in a way that looks like a technical disaster, not a financial crime. And in the chaos of a collapsed acquisition, the forensic review of the books gets delayed or derailed, she said. Or the acquiring firm walks away entirely and takes their due diligence findings with them, Logan said. Either way, the window to expose the financial fraud narrows significantly. She was quiet for a moment. He's going to be in that room. Yes. With the board. With the investors. With every employee we've invited to witness the ceremony. She looked at Logan. He's willing to put all of those people at risk. It wasn't a question, but Logan answered it anyway. He's calculated that the failure won't be severe enough to cause physical harm. He probably believes it's a system shutdown, embarrassing, destructive to the deal, but not dangerous. He paused. What he doesn't know is that his modifications created a secondary consequence he didn't anticipate. The thermal cascade I mapped out, he didn't design it. It's an emergent effect of the combination of changes. The reposition sensor plus the relay modification plus the trigger override, all running simultaneously under full ceremony load. Meaning it's more dangerous than he intended. Yes. Could people get hurt? The mezzanine level, Logan said. 40 seats plus staff. If the boiler line fails under thermal cascade, the release pressure would compromise the structural attachment of the mezzanine support brackets. He said it flatly, without drama, because that was the only way he knew how to say things like this. Yes, people could get hurt. Victoria looked at him across the table. Her jaw was set. She looked in that moment not like a CEO managing a crisis, but like someone who had just crossed a line in her own internal accounting. The line between a problem she was solving professionally and something that had become deeply, personally unacceptable. Tell me what the trap looks like, she said. The one you want to set. Logan had been working on this since Tuesday morning in the parking structure. He'd built it the same way he'd built operational plans in the Navy, starting with the desired outcome and working backward through every step, every contingency, every point where the plan could go wrong. The difference was that he wasn't running a four-man team in a controlled environment. I was working with a 30-year-old CEO who was learning as she went, in a building full of people who had no idea what was happening around them, against a man who was smart enough to have stolen over $1 million undetected for 6 years. The financial evidence is strong but not yet complete enough to present to the board without Crawford finding a way to create doubt, Logan said. The server logs showing his late-night access are useful, but he can argue legitimate executive activity. The trigger board is physical evidence, but it's in our building. It was installed by someone we haven't identified yet, and Crawford's attorney, whoever that is, will argue chain of custody the moment we present it. So what do we need? We need him to do something that can't be argued, Logan said. Something with his credentials, on a company server, with timestamps, that proves he knew the investigation existed and actively attempted to destroy evidence of his crimes. Victoria looked at him steadily. You want to show him a file? I want to put a file exactly where his executive credentials can reach it, and nowhere else, Logan said. A file that appears to contain the core of our investigation, financial records, the maintenance company trace, the payroll fraud summary, detailed enough to look like the real thing, compelling enough that a guilty man couldn't afford to leave it alone. He'd try to access it. He'd try to access it, copy it, and delete it, Logan said, and every one of those actions would be automatically logged by the server's audit trail, a trail that is completely separate from the executive relay he's been accessing, a trail that he doesn't know exists and doesn't have credentials to modify. The IT infrastructure, she said slowly. The managed services platform logs all file-level operations as part of its compliance framework. It's a background process, not visible in the standard interface, which is what Crawford uses. It exists because Sterling Ground's original incorporation documents required it for regulatory compliance. He paused. I found it in your company's IT documentation. Crawford may not even know it's there. She was quiet. She was thinking, not reacting, actually thinking, running through the implications. He respected that about her. If he accesses the file, she said, copies it, and then deletes it, we have his login, the timestamp, the access record, and the deletion attempt, all of it in an audit log that he can't touch. And his own executive login becomes the evidence against him, Logan said. There's no argument for it. No legitimate reason a regional director would be accessing a restricted investigation file at midnight and then attempting to erase it. She picked up the coffee, held it, set it back down without drinking. The file needs to be convincing enough that he panics, she said, not so detailed that it tips off what we actually have. I know what to put in it, Logan said. Enough truth to make it look real. Enough gap that he believes there's still time to contain it. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at him with the particular directness she had, the quality he'd noticed on the first day, when she'd walked into the cafe and read the room in about 4 seconds flat. Logan, she said, what happens if he triggers the system before we're ready, before the board meeting? It was the right question. He'd been carrying it for 3 days. Then I disable the secondary board manually, he said. I know where it is. I can remove it in under 10 minutes with the right tools. But if you do that, he knows we've found it. Yes. Which means we lose the trap. Yes. She absorbed that. So we're running two timelines simultaneously, the trap and the physical failsafe. Yes. And if the trap doesn't close in time, I pull the board, Logan said. The ceremony goes safely. We present what evidence we have to the board and the federal authorities and build the case from there. He looked at her. It's a slower road, but it gets to the same place. The ceremony is the better option, for the evidence, for the people he's stolen from, for the company, but not at the cost of anyone's safety. She held his gaze for a moment. He got the sense she was looking for the part of him that might be overstating his confidence, the part that would say whatever was needed to sound reassuring. She didn't find it because it wasn't there. What he told her was exactly what he thought. Two timelines, genuine uncertainty about which would close first, and a firm line that he wasn't willing to cross regardless of how the investigation went. All right, she said. When do we put the file in place? Tomorrow night, Logan said. I need 1 day to build it correctly. He spent Friday at the kitchen table with his laptop, Ava's cereal bowl still in the drying rack from that morning, a half-empty coffee pot going cold on the counter. He built the file the way he used to build cover documentation in the Navy, true enough to be convincing, structured enough to be readable, revealing enough to produce fear, incomplete enough to suggest that more still existed somewhere that needed to be found and destroyed. He used real vendor names from the shell company Trace his contact had provided. He used actual payroll figures from the Pacific Division's publicly filed quarterly reports and adjusted them in ways that looked like internal audit calculations. He embedded 4 or 5 details that were slightly wrong in specific ways that would look like investigative gaps rather than intentional errors, the kind of thing a guilty man reviewing an investigation file would note as mistakes that hadn't yet been caught. It took 6 hours. At 4 o'clock, Ava came home from school and dropped her backpack in the hallway with the particular percussion of a kid who'd had a full day and was done performing competence. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at the table, laptop, scattered notes, 2 empty coffee cups, and looked at her father. You haven't moved since this morning, she said. I moved. I made coffee twice. That's not moving. She opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it with the door open, doing the thing where she looked at the contents as though they might rearrange themselves into something more appealing. What are you working on? Consulting project, he said. For the coffee company? He looked at her. She looked back with the expression that said she knew more than she'd let on. 12-year-olds were dangerous in that particular way. They collected information from peripheral listening and indirect observation and assembled it without telling you they were doing it. Did you eat lunch? He said. Yes. Did you? He had not. I was going to, he said. She pulled a block of cheese and some leftover rice from the refrigerator and started making something at the counter without being asked. She was doing what she'd started doing about a year ago, the quiet, matter-of-fact competence that sometimes stopped him mid-thought because it was so thoroughly her mother's. Rachel had never fussed about anything. She'd just solved whatever needed solving and moved on. Dad, Ava said, her back to him, working on whatever she was assembling on the cutting board. Is it dangerous? What you're doing? The question landed cleanly. No dramatic lead-up, no worked-up emotion. Just the question. Logan closed the laptop. No, he said. And then, because she deserved better than a reflexive reassurance, not the way you mean. It's complicated, and there are parts of it I have to be careful about, but nobody's going to get hurt. She was quiet for a moment. You don't have to protect me from the real answer. I know, he said. That is the real answer. She turned around and looked at him, really looked, the way she did when she was deciding whether to trust something. And then she nodded once and turned back to the cutting board. He opened the laptop and went back to work. Friday night, 11 p.m. Logan let himself into the building through the service entrance, moved through the empty cafe the way he'd moved through it every night this week, quietly, without lights beyond the small flashlight he kept in his jacket pocket, and went to the server room. He connected to the managed services interface using the administrative credentials Victoria had authorized at the IT level. This wasn't the executive relay that Crawford used. This was the back end, the compliance framework layer, the one with the audit trail that ran automatically and logged everything. He created a folder in the executive document library. He titled it Q4 Internal Review. restricted access, legal hold. He set the permissions so that the folder was visible to executive credentials, Crawford's level and above, but required a separate authentication step to open, the kind that looked like a security measure but actually just created an additional log entry for every interaction. Then he uploaded the file he'd built at the kitchen table. It was 47 pages long. It had a cover sheet with Victoria Sterling's name on it and a date from 3 days ago and the words "Preliminary Findings, Confidential. Do not distribute in red across the top," the kind of formatting that a real internal investigation document might use, the kind that made the heart rate of a guilty man climb the moment he saw it. He checked the permissions twice, confirmed the audit trail was active, confirmed that Crawford's executive login was the only non-administrative credential that could see the folder. Then he disconnected, packed up, and left the building at 12:17 a.m. Walking back to his truck in the cold, he thought about the way these things worked, the way a trap wasn't just a mechanism, it was a proposition. You were proposing to a person that they would behave the way fear made people behave. You were betting on the predictable math of panic. A guilty person, shown evidence against them, couldn't leave it alone. They had to know how much was known. They had to try to contain it. That need, that specific compulsive need to control what gets seen, was the thing you were counting on. Crawford was a man who had managed information for 6 years, who had built a structure of concealment that was genuinely sophisticated. That kind of man didn't walk away from a threat to his structure. He moved toward it. Logan got in the truck, drove home, checked on Ava, who was asleep with a book still open on the bed beside her. He moved the book to the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went to bed and slept reasonably well, which surprised him. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. Logan spent both days at the building, continuing the maintenance assessment, which by now was thorough enough to serve as a genuine operational document if anyone asked. He'd mapped every modification to the roasting system. He'd photographed every component. He'd written up a full technical report in his notebook that accounted for each sabotaged element and what would be required to restore the system to its original safe operational state. He also checked the server logs both mornings. The file sat untouched. He didn't expect Crawford to move immediately. Crawford was disciplined. That was part of what made him dangerous. A less careful man might have gone for the file the first night. Crawford would wait. He'd think about it. He'd weigh his options. He'd probably convince himself for a day or two that the best move was to do nothing and see how the situation developed. But the file would stay in his mind. Logan knew this because he understood the specific torture of knowing a threat exists and not knowing how complete it is. Crawford would be functional, professional, conducting his week normally. And every time the building systems were mentioned, every time someone used the word investigation in passing, every time he logged into his executive relay for routine work, that folder would be sitting in his peripheral vision like a splinter. On Monday morning, Victoria called Logan's cell at 7:45. "He's acting differently," she said. "Different how?" "He was already in the building when I arrived at 7. He's usually here at 9. He walked the main floor twice before the morning shift was fully set up, which he never does. He stopped in the equipment room, your equipment room, for about 5 minutes and then left without speaking to anyone." "He's checking his environment," Logan said. "He was in the parking structure, having arrived 20 minutes ago. He feels the pressure, but he hasn't located it yet. He's looking for the thing that's changed." "Should I act normal with him?" "Be exactly the way you've been," Logan said. "Don't give him anything warmer or cooler than usual. He'll read either as a signal." A pause. I want you to know I find this deeply uncomfortable." "I know," Logan said. "I went into this thinking it was a financial problem with a clean solution. Audit, terminate, restore, move forward." Another pause. "It's not that." "No," Logan said. "It never is." She was quiet for a moment. "How are you this calm?" It was a genuine question, not a compliment. He thought about it honestly before answering. "I'm not calm," he said. "I've just learned where to put the part that isn't." He heard her exhale, something between recognition and resignation. "Check the logs tonight," she said. "I will," he said. Monday night, 11:53 p.m. Logan was at home, at the kitchen table, laptop open to the audit trail interface. He'd been watching it since 10. At 11:53 p.m., Damian Crawford's executive credentials logged into the Sterling Grounds document management system. Logan sat forward. The login timestamp appeared. Then a navigation entry. Crawford had gone directly to the executive document library. Not browsing, direct. He'd been thinking about the folder all weekend and he knew exactly where to look. The folder appeared in the access log. Crawford had opened the outer directory. 30 seconds passed. Then he opened the file. Logan watched the log entries appear in real time, each one time-stamped to the second. Crawford was reading. The session stayed active. 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8. At 8 minutes and 40 seconds, a copy operation initiated. Crawford was downloading the file to an external device. Logan's hands were flat on the table. He didn't move. The copy completed. Then, 11 seconds later, a deletion request. Crawford had highlighted the file, the folder, and attempted to remove them from the document library. The deletion went through on Crawford's interface. From his screen, the folder was gone. What Crawford didn't know, couldn't know, because it wasn't documented in any of the executive-level system guides, was that the Compliance Framework's audit layer maintained a shadow archive of all file operations. Deletion didn't remove the audit record. It created a new entry. File deleted by user D. Crawford. Credentials, executive level, timestamp 00217, Wednesday. The full log now showed access, read, copy to external device, deletion attempt. All of it. Time-stamped. Credential verified. Immutable. Logan sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and typed a message to Victoria. He took the bait. We have everything we need. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we need to talk to your board chair. Her response came back in under 2 minutes, which meant she'd been awake, waiting. I know who to call. How early is too early? Logan looked at the kitchen clock. It was just past midnight. 6 a.m., he typed. Bring the financial files your contact prepared. I'll bring the technical documentation and the server logs. All of it printed. Okay. He closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights briefly moving across the ceiling through the window. He thought about the file he'd built at this same table 3 days ago. The hours of careful construction, every detail calibrated. And Crawford sitting somewhere tonight, his apartment maybe, or his office, believing he'd handled it. Believing the threat was gone because he'd deleted a document. The confidence of that belief was the most dangerous thing about men like Crawford. They were smart enough to build the structure, careful enough to maintain it, but ultimately, when the pressure came, they trusted their own moves too completely. They didn't account for the possibility that someone had watched every one of those moves before they made them. Logan got up, rinsed his coffee cup, turned off the kitchen light. He stood in the hallway outside Ava's room for a moment. The door was slightly open. He could hear her breathing, the slow, even rhythm of deep sleep, the specific quality of it that he'd been cataloging unconsciously for 12 years, the sound that meant she was safe and fine and here. He had 8 days of careful work ahead still, the board meeting, the technical testimony, the federal referral, the system repair, all of it. None of it was guaranteed to go cleanly. Crawford had an attorney somewhere. The board would have questions. The acquisition team would need to be handled with precision or the deal would collapse entirely, which wasn't the goal. But the trap had closed, and that was the part that needed to happen first. The board chair's name was Eleanor Marsh, and she had been with Sterling Grounds since the company's second year of operation, when James Sterling had recruited her from a regional bank where she'd spent 15 years making difficult decisions about other people's money. She was 61 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the particular quality of very experienced people who no longer needed to perform authority because they'd long since stopped being uncertain about whether they had it. She met Victoria and Logan at 6:15 in the morning in a conference room at her law firm's office building, 3 blocks from the Sterling Grounds flagship. She'd arranged the room herself, coffee on the table, the kind from a pot, not a machine. And she sat down without ceremony and looked at the documents Logan had laid out and said, "Walk me through it in order, don't editorialize, just the facts and where each one comes from." Logan walked her through it in order. He started with the technical findings. The relay modification, the repositioned thermal sensor, the secondary circuit board and its trigger mechanism. He showed her the photographs, the diagnostic readings, the schematic from his original documentation showing what the system was designed to do versus what it had been modified to do. He explained the thermal cascade in plain language, the mezzanine risk, the ceremony timeline. Eleanor Marsh asked 4 questions during this portion. All 4 were precise. She didn't ask anything twice. Then he moved to the financial layer, the shell companies, the Apex Facility Services trace, the 4 additional entities his contact had identified. The total payment figure, $1.4 million, accumulated over 6 years through vendor authorizations that Crawford had approved himself. Then the payroll data, the 12 to 15% skimming rate across Pacific Division hourly staff, the routing through the shell account structure, the 4-year timeline. He laid the server logs down last, the late-night login, the file access, the copy operation, the deletion attempt, each entry time-stamped, each one tied to Crawford's executive credentials, all of it pulled from an audit trail that Crawford hadn't known existed and therefore hadn't thought to disable. He put the printed logs on the table and stepped back. Eleanor picked them up. She read through them slowly, the way she'd read everything else, without rushing, without performing reaction. When she finished, she set them down carefully and took her glasses off and looked at Victoria. "You've had this for how long?" she said. "The complete picture, since this morning," Victoria said. "The financial irregularities, longer. That's what led me to Logan. And Crawford doesn't know the extent of what you have." "He believes he deleted the primary evidence file last night," Logan said. "He doesn't know about the audit trail." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. He got the sense she was doing what experienced people do when they encounter someone they haven't fully assessed yet, recalibrating based on new information. "You built the trap file," she said. "Yes." "And you're confident the audit trail is legally admissible?" "It's the company's own compliance infrastructure," Logan said. "Mandatory under the terms of the original incorporation documents. It's been running continuously since the company's 3rd year of operation. Every file operation, every login, every deletion attempt, automatically logged, automatically archived, never modified by human hand." He paused. "Crawford's attorney is going to look for a chain of custody argument. There isn't one. The log is machine-generated, and the company's own IT documentation proves it's been there the entire time." Eleanor looked at Victoria. "You need to call the full board today, not tomorrow. Today." "I know," Victoria said, "and you need to have federal counsel present before this meeting happens." Eleanor put her glasses back on. "This is beyond termination and civil recovery. The payroll fraud alone crosses federal thresholds. The sabotage, if it's what this documentation suggests, is potentially criminal endangerment." She picked up the server logs again, looked at them once more. "You've also identified the attorney in Nevada as the destination of the encrypted file transfer." "The server that received the transfer is registered to a legal services firm," Logan said. "We haven't confirmed who the attorney is yet. My financial contact is working that." "Get me a name by this afternoon," Eleanor said. "If Crawford has had outside legal counsel advising him through this, and this level of structure doesn't happen without legal advice, that attorney has potential liability exposure too. That changes how we approach the federal referral." Victoria nodded. She'd been taking notes on a small pad throughout, the handwriting tight and controlled. Logan noticed that she hadn't looked rattled once during the meeting, not by the physical safety findings, not by the payroll numbers, not by Eleanor's rapid-fire questions. She looked like a woman who had decided exactly what she was going to do and was now simply executing it. He thought, not for the first time this week, that James Sterling had been right about his daughter, even if the old man had been wrong about a lot of other things. Eleanor stood up. "I'll call the board. We'll convene at 2 p.m. today at the flagship. Not at a neutral location, at the building, because I want every board member to understand that the people at risk are real and present." She looked at Logan. "You'll present the technical findings." "Yes." "Can you speak to the physical risk clearly enough that a room of non-technical people understands it?" "I've briefed admirals," Logan said. Eleanor almost smiled. "Good enough." She picked up her legal pad. "Victoria, call the acquisition team's senior partner, Holt, before the board meeting. Tell him there's a significant development and the ceremony may need to be rescheduled. Don't give him details yet. You want him informed, but not in the room." "He'll want answers," Victoria said. "He'll get them," Eleanor said. In the right order and with the right documentation in hand, not from a hallway conversation at 6 a.m. She moved toward the door. This is going to be an ugly day. Prepare for it. The meeting ended at 7:10. What? Logan spent the morning at the building, doing what he'd been doing all week. The maintenance cover, the equipment room, the slow and methodical presence of a man going about an unremarkable job. He needed Crawford to see nothing different. The board meeting was at 2. Until then, the most dangerous thing that could happen was Crawford sensing the closing walls and doing something unpredictable. He saw Crawford at 9:30, crossing the main floor toward the management corridor. Crawford was dressed the way he always dressed, the Italian jacket, the Swiss watch, but Logan noticed something different in the way he carried himself. The usual expansive authority was pulled in slightly, like a sail trimmed against a wind that hadn't been there yesterday. He was moving with the controlled efficiency of someone managing internal pressure. Their eyes met briefly as Crawford crossed the floor. Crawford looked at him the way you look at furniture, without acknowledgement, without recognition of the previous week's events, the practiced nullification of something he'd already categorized and dismissed. Logan looked back with nothing on his face at all. Crawford moved on. Logan went back to the equipment room and wrote 3 more pages in his notebook. At 11:15, his phone buzzed. A message from his financial contact, a woman named Diane, who had spent 8 years in naval intelligence before moving into private forensic work, and who communicated with the compression of someone accustomed to classified channels. The message said, Nevada attorney. Name is Paul Whitmore. Incorporated 2 LLCs for Crawford personally over the past 3 years, both dormant, clean on paper. Whitmore filed the business registration for Apex Facility Services. He's the registered agent. Logan read it twice. Then he forwarded it to Eleanor Marsh with no additional comment. Her response came back in 6 minutes. This changes the federal referral significantly. He's not a bystander. Thank you. Logan pocketed the phone. The attorney had filed the registration for the shell company that received the stolen wages. He was embedded in the structure from the beginning. That was the kind of fact that turned a termination and a civil lawsuit into something with considerably more legal consequence. He thought about the employees. Priya, 4 years of skimmed overtime. The 2 people who'd filed HR complaints and lost their jobs for it. 800 workers across 23 locations, each one missing somewhere between 12 and 15% of what they'd earned. He thought about what 12% of a paycheck means when you're working a morning shift at a coffee company and you're trying to make rent. He found Priya at the bar station during the mid-morning lull. She was cleaning the espresso machine, methodical, careful, the same quality of attention she brought to the grind adjustment. He stood nearby for a moment until she noticed him. "You're still here," she said. Not unfriendly. Observational. "Few more days of assessment," he said. She nodded, working a small brush into the group head. "Something's different today," she said. Not a question. "Busy week," he said. She looked at him sideways. Crawford's been strange. He walked the floor twice this morning and didn't speak to anyone, which is unusual even for him. She paused. He usually at least finds something to criticize. Logan said nothing. "Are you going to tell me what's happening?" she said, directly. No performance around it. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about Eleanor's instruction to keep the circle tight until the board meeting. He thought about what he'd said to Victoria in the parking structure. None of them get caught in it. "Not right now," he said. "But I want to ask you something." She set the brush down, gave him her full attention. "The wage discrepancy you noticed," he said. "Did you document it?" She looked at him steadily. "I kept my own records. Pay stubs, bank deposit confirmations. For the past 2 years. Do you still have them?" "Yes." "Can you get copies to Victoria Sterling today before 2 p.m.? A pause. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise exactly, more like the recognition of a thing she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. "Yeah," she said. "I can do that." "Good," Logan said. He picked up the toolbox. "You didn't file a complaint," he said. Not an accusation, just a question with context behind it. "I watched what happened to the 2 people who did," she said. He nodded. "I know." He moved toward the equipment room. "That changes today." He said it without drama, without making it into something, and kept walking. Behind him, he heard her turn back to the espresso machine, and there was a brief pause in the brushing sound that might have been nothing or might have been a 24-year-old woman with 4 years of kept records letting herself believe carefully that something might actually be different. The board convened at 2 p.m. There were 7 members, including Eleanor and Victoria. They met in the private event room on the second floor of the flagship, a room Sterling Grounds used for corporate dinners and investor presentations, with the company's original mission statement mounted on the wall in the kind of heavy framing that suggested someone had once believed those words very seriously. Logan stood at the end of the table with a laptop connected to the room's display screen and the printed documentation arranged in packets that Eleanor's assistant had prepared that morning. The board members ranged from a retired supply chain executive in his 70s named Gerald Foss, who'd been on the board since the beginning, to a 43-year-old venture capital partner named Sandra Okafor, who joined 3 years ago and had a reputation for direct questions and low tolerance for hedged answers. None of them knew what the meeting was about. Eleanor had told them only that it was urgent and mandatory. Crawford was not in the room. He hadn't been invited. That was deliberate. Eleanor's call, and Logan agreed with it. You didn't show your hand until you'd already won the hand. Logan presented the technical findings first. 20 minutes, no hedging, the same order he'd used with Eleanor at 6 a.m. Physical modifications, thermal risk, trigger mechanism, ceremony timeline. He showed the photographs on the screen and let them sit long enough for each board member to actually look at them. He explained the mezzanine risk in terms of what it meant for the 40 people who would be seated there during the ceremony, and he did not soften the language. Gerald Foss asked whether the system could be repaired. Yes, Logan said. I can restore it to its original safe configuration. I know this system better than anyone alive, and I have the original schematics. It's a full night's work, but it's achievable before the ceremony if the ceremony is rescheduled by at least 48 hours. You built it, Foss said. It wasn't quite a question. My wife and I designed it, Logan said. 14 years ago. A brief silence. Foss looked at the table. He was old enough to remember Rachel Sterling. She'd kept her maiden name professionally, and in the early years she and Logan had been fixtures at company events. Foss had probably shaken her hand. Logan watched the old man put it together and didn't rush him through it. Sandra Okafor broke the silence. What's the confidence level on the technical assessment? Are we certain this was deliberate and not a sequence of maintenance failures? The secondary circuit board is deliberate, Logan said. It's a purpose-built trigger device. It wasn't there when I last inspected this system, which was 6 years ago. Everything else could theoretically be argued as compounding maintenance failures, but the board cannot. Someone put it there knowing exactly what it would do. Okafor nodded. She didn't need more than that. Logan moved to the financial presentation. Victoria took over for this section, walking the board through the shell company structure, the vendor fraud, the payroll skimming, using the documentation Diane had prepared, and the supplementary records Priya had sent over at 1:30 p.m. 2 years of personal pay stubs and bank confirmations from a single employee, which Eleanor had immediately identified as exactly the kind of ground-level corroborating evidence that a federal investigation would find compelling. The room temperature changed during this section. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no visible collapse of composure. But the quality of attention shifted. The board members leaned forward slightly. Questions became shorter and faster. Gerald Foss stopped taking notes and just listened. When Victoria finished, she put the payroll data summary on the screen. A single page that Diane had prepared showing the estimated total wage theft across the Pacific Division over 4 years. The number was $3.2 million. It had grown from the initial estimate as Diane had expanded the trace to include additional division locations Logan hadn't initially factored in. Nobody said anything for about 10 seconds. Then Eleanor placed the server logs in front of the board and Logan walked through them. 3 minutes. Just the facts. Login timestamp, file access, copy operation, deletion attempt, Crawford's credentials on every entry. He believed he'd destroyed the evidence, Logan said. He didn't know the audit trail existed. Sandra Okafor looked at the logs for a moment. He deleted a file he shouldn't have known about, that he accessed using his executive credentials, at midnight, and copied to an external device before deleting it. Yes, Logan said, and the audit trail is machine-generated, continuously archived, never modified. It's been running for 9 years. She sat back. Okay, she said quietly, to herself more than anyone else. Okay. Eleanor spoke then, for the first time since the presentations began. She laid out the legal picture with the efficiency of someone who'd spent the morning on the phone with federal counsel. Termination of Crawford's employment, immediate suspension of his system access and executive credentials, freezing of any company accounts he had authorization over, simultaneous referral to federal authorities, wage theft at this scale, across this many employees, with this level of deliberate concealment, fell squarely under federal jurisdiction. The Nevada attorney's involvement changed the nature of the referral. This wasn't one person's fraud. It was a coordinated scheme with outside legal facilitation. The acquisition ceremony would be rescheduled by 72 hours. Holt had been called by Victoria at noon and told there was a significant development. He'd pushed for details, gotten very few, and agreed with visible reluctance to a brief pause. He'd be given a full briefing before the rescheduled ceremony. The board voted. 7 in favor of all recommended actions, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. It took 4 minutes. Crawford was called to the second-floor event room at 3:45 p.m. He came in, expecting. Logan wasn't sure what he expected. A project meeting, perhaps. A scheduling discussion about the ceremony. He walked in with his jacket straight and his shoulders set and the practiced ease of a man arriving at a room he believed he owned. He saw Logan standing against the wall beside the laptop and the display screen, which still showed the last slide from the presentation. He saw the board members at the table. He saw Victoria at the far end, not looking at him. He saw Eleanor Marsh at the near end, looking at him with the particular stillness of someone waiting for a formality to complete itself. His pace didn't break. His expression didn't collapse. Logan noted that the discipline of it, the way Crawford's face performed normalcy for about 3 full seconds while his eyes read the room. 3 seconds was actually longer than most people managed. Then his eyes found the server logs on the table in front of Eleanor, and the 3 seconds ended. "Damien," Eleanor said. "Sit down, please." Crawford didn't sit. "What is this?" "This is an emergency board meeting that has been in session since 2 p.m., Eleanor said. "You're here because the board has reached several conclusions that require your immediate response." She paused. "Or not. That's your right. But I'd recommend sitting down because this conversation is going to take a while either way." A long moment. Crawford looked at Logan again. His jaw had set the way it had that first morning when the ground shifted under him in the cafe and he'd gone very still. The same tell. The same calculation happening behind the same eyes. He sat down. Eleanor placed the first document in front of him. Not the server logs. The technical report. The photographs of the secondary circuit board. The thermal cascade analysis. "We'll start with the building," she said. Crawford looked at the photographs. Something moved through his expression that he controlled quickly, but not quite quickly enough. Logan watched it. The fractional recognition, the almost imperceptible recalibration of a man confronting a document that revealed what should not have been findable. "I don't know what this is," Crawford said. "It's a trigger mechanism installed in the flagship roasting system," Eleanor said. "It was designed to cause a controlled thermal failure during the acquisition ceremony. The board has received a full technical assessment from Logan Hayes, who built the original system and is the only person qualified to fully interpret these findings." She looked at him calmly. "Would you like to hear his assessment?" "I said I don't know what this is," Crawford said again, firmer. "That's one position," Eleanor said. She moved the photograph aside and placed the shell company documentation in front of him. What followed was 40 minutes that Logan would not have described as satisfying, because he'd learned a long time ago that the moment a trap closes is not actually the relief people expect it to be. It is mostly just work. Crawford denied the shell companies. He characterized the vendor payments as legitimate consulting arrangements. He called the payroll discrepancies a systemic processing error that he'd been in the process of investigating internally. He did not, at any point, display anything that looked like genuine remorse. Only the strategic deployment of denial, the kind that an intelligent person runs not because they believe it will work, but because the alternative is worse. When Eleanor placed the server logs in front of him, Crawford stopped talking. He read them, slowly. Logan watched him read the timestamp of his midnight login, the file access entry, the copy operation, the deletion attempt. Crawford set the logs down and folded his hands on the table. "I'd like to contact my attorney," he said. "Of course," Eleanor said, "after we've finished." "I'd like to contact my attorney now," he said. "You'll have that opportunity," Eleanor said, "in a few minutes. We have one more item for the board's record." She placed the final document in front of him, the payroll summary, the $3.2 million figure at the bottom of the page. This represents the estimated total amount of wages stolen from Pacific Division hourly employees over a 4-year period, routed through the shell company structure you established and maintained with the assistance of Paul Whitmore, attorney, Nevada. Crawford's expression shifted at the attorney's name, just slightly, just enough. "Federal authorities," Eleanor continued, "are being contacted today. This board has voted unanimously to refer all findings to the appropriate agencies. Your employment with Sterling Grounds is terminated, effective immediately. Your executive access has already been revoked. Company accounts you had authorization over are frozen pending the federal investigation." She paused. "Do you have anything you'd like to say for the board's record?" Crawford looked at Victoria for the first time since he'd sat down. It was a long look, not apologetic, not angry exactly. Something more complicated and less clean than either of those things. The look of a man who'd made calculations across years and watched them fail in an afternoon. Victoria looked back at him steadily and said nothing. Crawford looked at the table. "No," he said. "I have nothing to say." He was escorted from the building by building security at 4:37 p.m. At 6 p.m., after the board had dispersed, and the federal counsel had the full documentation package and Eleanor had made the calls she needed to make, the flagship cafe was quiet. The evening shift was setting up. The city outside was doing its early evening reconfiguration, the light going amber and long across the floors through the tall windows. Logan was in the equipment room. He'd sent a message to his sister asking if Ava could stay the night, and his sister had said yes without asking questions because she was good at reading the silences between his words. He had the toolbox open and the laptop running the system's full diagnostic and the spiral notebook open to a clean page. He was going to work through the night. The secondary circuit board came out first. He photographed it in place one final time for documentation, then removed it with careful deliberation, disconnecting its leads in the sequence that prevented any residual signal from triggering the mechanism in the process of disabling it. He set it in a static bag and labeled it and put it in a separate compartment of the toolbox that he'd lined with foam for exactly this purpose. The federal investigators would want it intact. Then he started on the relay housing. The work was slow and required full attention, which suited him. When his hands were doing something that demanded precision, the part of his brain that usually ran its own parallel commentary, the what-ifs, the after-action analysis, the inventory of what he'd gotten wrong or could have done better, went quieter. He'd always been this way. Rachel used to say that he thought better with a wrench in his hand than at any conference table she'd ever seen him at. She wasn't wrong. He thought about her sometimes when he worked on this system, not in a way he could exactly describe, not nostalgic, not painful in the sharp way grief is in the early years, more like a background awareness. She had sat across a kitchen table from him 14 years ago with a cup of coffee and a piece of graph paper and argued, correctly, that the relay configuration needed a secondary thermal pathway to handle the load variance during summer humidity peaks, and she had been right, and he had eventually agreed she was right. And the modification she proposed was still in the system's architecture, still functioning exactly as she'd designed it, outlasting everything else. That was something, he thought. The best things people build tend to outlast the problems that surround them, if you protect them carefully enough. He kept working. The relay housing restoration took 2 hours. The thermal sensor repositioning took another 45 minutes. He had to fabricate a replacement bracket for one component that Crawford's person had modified in a way that made it non-reversible. The fabrication took time he hadn't accounted for, requiring a trip to his truck for tools he didn't usually bring into the building. He was back inside by 9:30. By midnight, he was into the control board. This was the most delicate portion, the firmware label, the hardware modification underneath it. He removed the altered components and replaced them with original spec hardware he'd sourced the previous week from the same industrial supplier he'd used 14 years ago, a family-owned operation in Portland that still carried the exact component line. He'd called them on Thursday, and they'd had it shipped overnight. The owner's son had taken the order and said his father still talked about the Sterling ground system as one of the most elegant designs they'd ever supplied parts for. Logan had said thank you and meant it. The control board work finished at 2:40 a.m. He ran the diagnostic again. Full cycle this time, letting the system run through its complete operational sequence, monitoring every reading against the original specifications in his notebook. The thermostat drift he'd found on the very first morning resolved correctly. The boiler pressure readings normalized. The relay housing performed exactly as it had been designed to perform. The system read clean. He sat back against the wall, toolbox closed, notebook on his knee, and let the machines run their quiet morning rhythm around him. The refrigeration units, the heating cycle, the sound of the city outside beginning its imperceptible shift from deep night towards the earliest suggestion of morning. He was tired in the particular way of someone who'd been running on focus for days and had just run out of things that required it. Not depleted, something closer to the feeling at the end of a long operation when the objective is secured and the immediate threat is gone, and your body takes a moment to remind you that you are in fact human and have in fact been awake since early yesterday. He thought about Ava, asleep at his sister's house. He thought about the text she'd sent him at 9 p.m. Done yet? And the response he'd sent back. Few more hours. Go to sleep. Her response to that had been a thumbs down. Then, 30 seconds later, an emoji that might have been a coffee cup, and he'd actually smiled at his phone in an empty hallway. He pulled out the spiral notebook and looked at the first page. The work order from the very first morning. The 4 underlines. The beginning of it. He flipped through the pages. The diagnostic readings. The modification photographs. The network log analysis. The technical report he'd assembled page by page over the course of a week. He closed the notebook and put it in the toolbox. At 3 a.m., he stood up, stretched the stiffness out of his back, and did a final walk of the equipment room. Everything in order, every component in its right place. The system running the way it had been designed to run, the way it had run for years before someone decided to use it as a weapon. He turned off the flashlight and stood in the dark for a moment, listening to the building breathe. He left the building at 3:12 a.m. and drove home through empty streets. The city at that hour had a specific quality that Logan had always appreciated. Not peaceful exactly, more like honest. The daytime version of any city is a performance, people moving with purpose, presenting themselves in motion. At 3 a.m. there was none of that. Just the infrastructure, the streetlights doing their patient work, the occasional truck making a delivery to somewhere that needed to be stocked before anyone noticed it was empty. The city as a system rather than a stage. He let himself into the apartment quietly out of habit, even knowing Ava wasn't there. Changed out of his work clothes. Drank a full glass of water standing at the kitchen sink. His back ached across the lower right side from the hours on the equipment room floor, and his hands had the particular stiffness of fine work done in cold air. He stood at the window for a moment and looked at the strip of backyard. Ava's bicycle was still against the fence. The rear tire was still soft. He went to bed at 3:40 and slept until 8:15, which was longer than he'd expected. The next 3 days moved in a way that felt nothing like resolution, and everything like the unglamorous aftermath of something that had already been decided. Federal investigators arrived on Wednesday morning, 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Division and 1 from a joint task force that handled infrastructure sabotage cases. Logan spent 4 hours with them in the equipment room, walking through every modification he'd found and documented, presenting the photographs and the diagnostic logs and the original schematics with his 14-year-old handwriting in the margins. The secondary circuit board went into their evidence chain. They asked good questions, the kind that came from people who'd done this long enough to know what they didn't know, and Logan answered them with the same directness he'd used with Eleanor Marsh. One of the agents, a woman named Torres, who'd spent the first hour barely speaking and the second hour asking the most technically precise questions of anyone Logan had worked with outside of a military context, looked at the restored system running its clean diagnostic and said, "You did this overnight?" "Yes," Logan said. "Alone?" "Yes." She looked at the control board for a moment. "You understand this system well enough to rebuild it from scratch if you had to?" It wasn't really a question. "I designed most of it," Logan said. Torres nodded slowly. She was looking at the original schematic he'd laid out on the work table, the graph paper version, the one with Rachel's modification marked in different ink from the rest. She didn't ask about the second handwriting. Logan appreciated that. The trigger board, Torres said. The installation quality. Whoever put it in knew what they were doing. Yes, Logan said. We'll want to identify the installer. Crawford would know, Logan said. Or Whitmore. One of them contracted it. That's where we're heading, Torres said. She gathered her materials with the efficiency of someone who had 17 other things to get to. Mr. Hayes, this documentation is the cleanest physical evidence package I've seen from a non-investigative source. A pause. Not a compliment exactly, more like an acknowledgement. Thank you for preserving it correctly. Logan nodded. She left. He stood in the equipment room alone for a moment, listening to the system run its steady rhythm, and thought that was probably the closest to recognition this part of the work was going to get, which was fine. He'd done it for different reasons. The financial investigation moved faster than anyone had expected, which Diane told Logan on Thursday, when she called to update him, was largely because Crawford had been sloppy in ways that only become visible in retrospect, the kind of sloppiness that comes from 6 years of not being caught, the gradual erosion of caution that success produces in people who've confused luck with skill. The shell company structure looked sophisticated on the surface and was genuinely sophisticated in design, but the transaction patterns, once someone knew to look for them, were repetitive in ways that forensic accounting software caught quickly. The Apex facility services payments clustered around the same billing cycle every quarter. The payroll skimming applied at the same rate across every Pacific Division location simultaneously, a consistency that looked like a software setting, because it was. Crawford had automated his own theft. He was running it like a business process, Diane told Logan. Set it up, let it run, check the outputs quarterly. He wasn't watching it closely enough to catch when someone else started watching it. Whitmore, Logan said. Whitmore is in a considerably worse position than Crawford, Diane said. The business registrations, the LLC structures, the routing accounts. He didn't just facilitate it, he maintained it, updated filings, renewed registrations, managed the account relationships. He was the operations manager of the scheme. A pause. His law license is going to be the least of his problems. Logan thanked her and ended the call. He was sitting in his truck outside the school at 2:50 p.m., waiting for Ava to come out. He watched the doors and thought about Whitmore, about the particular trajectory of a man who'd probably started with one small accommodation, one gray area favor for a paying client, and followed that first small step down a slope that didn't look steep until you were too far down it to see the top anymore. He didn't feel much sympathy for Whitmore, but he understood, in the abstract, how people arrived at places they'd never imagined themselves. The school doors opened. Kids came out in the usual surge, the specific chaos of 400 people released simultaneously, backpacks and phones and the noise of people who've been required to be quiet all day suddenly not being required to anymore. Ava came out with a girl Logan recognized as her friend from the science elective, a tall kid named Bex, who wore her school sweatshirt inside out for reasons that Logan had never asked about and suspected were important to understand only if you were 12. They were talking with the full-body animation of kids mid-story, hands moving, heads turning toward each other, and then away. Ava was laughing at something. She saw the truck and said something to Bex, who waved in the truck's general direction, and came over. She opened the door and got in and dropped her backpack between her feet and said, "You look tired." "I am tired," Logan said. "Did you fix it? The thing at the coffee place?" He pulled out of the parking spot and merged into the school pickup traffic. "Yeah," he said, "it's fixed." She was quiet for a moment. "All of it?" He glanced at her. She was looking out the windshield with the expression she got when she was working up to something she'd been holding on to. "All of it," he said. "It's going to take a while for all the pieces to get sorted out. But the main problem is resolved." She nodded. Then she said, "Mrs. Carruthers asked us today what our parents do for work." "What did you say?" "I said you were in the Navy and now you do consulting." She paused. "Which is true, technically." "It is," he said, "but it felt incomplete." She turned to look at him. She had Rachel's directness, had always had it, even at 4 years old, the particular quality of looking at something and saying what she saw. "You built something," she said. "The coffee company. You and Mom, right?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Yes." "And then things happened and you left." "Yes." And now you went back. She wasn't asking, she was assembling. And you fixed it. Something like that, he said. She was quiet again. He turned onto their street. The afternoon light was doing the long amber thing it did in late afternoon in October, stretching across the pavement in a way that made everything look slightly more significant than it probably was. I think, Ava said carefully, that's a better answer than consulting. Logan parked in front of the building. He turned the engine off. He sat there for a moment. Yeah, he said. I think you're right. The conversation with Victoria happened the day before the rescheduled acquisition ceremony. She came to the building, not the flagship, the small office space Sterling grounds kept for administrative functions 2 blocks away, and they sat across a conference table that was nothing like Eleanor Marsh's, just a folding table with 4 chairs and a window that looked out at a parking structure. She looked better than she had at any point during the previous 2 weeks. Not rested. Logan doubted she'd slept a full night since before any of this started, but settled, like a person who had survived something they weren't sure they would survive and was now on the other side of it taking an honest inventory. The employees, she said, Pacific Division, we're processing the back pay calculations now, 812 people over 4 years. She looked at the table. Some of them have been here since before Damien. They never knew. I know, Logan said. We're doing direct deposit where we can. Physical checks for the ones without current direct deposit on file. We're sending a letter with each payment, personal, not a corporate form letter. She looked up. I wrote it myself. It took me 3 drafts. What does it say? Logan said. She paused. It says we failed them, that what happened was a theft, and that the people responsible are being held accountable, and that the amount enclosed represents every dollar we can document was taken from them. She paused again. And that if they have records of their own, pay stubs, anything, and believe the amount is wrong, there's a number to call and a person will answer it. She looked at him directly. A real person, not a phone tree. Logan thought about Priya's 2 years of pay stubs in a personal file, kept quietly, carefully, the documentation of someone who knew something was wrong and couldn't prove it and kept the evidence anyway, hoping for a day that might never come. The 2 employees who were terminated after filing complaints, Logan said. I called them personally, Victoria said. Both of them. One of them, a man named Carter, he worked the Riverside location. He's been unemployed for 7 months. She said that with the flatness of someone reporting a fact they find genuinely hard to hold. We're offering both of them reinstatement at their previous positions with full back pay for the period of wrongful termination and a formal written acknowledgement that their performance records are cleared. Did Carter say he'd come back? He said he'd think about it, Victoria said, which I understand completely. She was quiet for a moment. I don't expect them to come back. I expect them to take the back pay and never think about Sterling grounds again, and I think that's probably the right choice for both of them. I just needed them to know that someone said it was wrong, out loud, on the record. Logan nodded. Victoria looked at him for a moment. Can I ask you something? Yes, he said. When I found you, 3 weeks ago, at your apartment with the folder, you could have said no. You had no legal obligation. You had every personal reason to tell me to sort it out on my own. I know, Logan said. Why didn't you? He thought about this honestly. It was a fair question, and it deserved something better than the first answer that came to mind, which was simply, because someone had broken the thing Rachel and I built, and I couldn't leave that alone. That was part of it, but it wasn't all of it. The baristas, he said finally, the people working those morning shifts, Priya, Carter, all of them. They came to work every day for something that was being stolen from underneath them, and they had no idea. And I had the specific knowledge to stop it. He paused. You can't unknow something like that. Once you know, leaving it alone is also a choice. It just doesn't feel like one. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My father made a lot of mistakes, trusting the wrong people, not protecting the people who built this company alongside him. She looked at the window. He also built something worth protecting. I spent the first 2 years after he died trying to figure out which one of those things to feel. Both can be true, Logan said. Yeah, she said. I know that now. She looked back at him. I want to offer you something. And I want to say up front that I've thought about how to frame this carefully because I don't want it to sound like a transaction. Logan waited. Sterling Grounds needs someone who understands its physical infrastructure from the inside out, she said, who understands what the system is supposed to do and can tell when someone is doing something to it that shouldn't be done. But it also needs, and this is the part I've been thinking about longer, it needs someone whose job it is to notice when the human infrastructure is wrong, when the people running things have stopped protecting the people they're supposed to protect. She put her hands flat on the table. I want to create a role. Independent. Reports to me and to the board directly. No intermediary, no regional authority over it. Operational safety, compliance integrity, and what I've been calling, in my own head, people accountability. The job is to catch the thing before it becomes what this became. Logan looked at her steadily. The salary is real, she said, not symbolic. I ran it by Eleanor and she agreed it's appropriate for the scope. She paused. And the hours are flexible. I know you have a daughter. I know she comes first. That's not a condition I'm placing on the role. It's a condition I'm designing the role around. Logan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the morning he'd walked into the flagship with the toolbox, carrying the weight of a history he'd spent years learning to set down. He'd come back because Victoria had found him, and the problem was real, and people were at risk. That was the logic of it, the clean version. But sitting here now, he understood that there was another truth underneath the logic, that he'd come back because some part of him had never fully let go of what this place was supposed to be, what he and Rachel had intended it to be. Not a billion-dollar acquisition target, not a regional empire for someone like Crawford to hollow out. A company that made something real and treated the people who made it with the basic dignity of paying them what they'd earned. That was not a sophisticated vision. It was actually a very simple one. Simple things, Logan had found, were the hardest to protect. I have a condition, he said. Victoria waited. Priya gets a formal acknowledgement. The 2 years of records she kept, the pay stubs, the bank statements. Those go into the evidence file, and her name goes into the company's record as someone who documented a wrong and preserved the evidence. Not internal, formal, something she can point to. Done, Victoria said immediately. She'd been ready for something harder. And the suppliers Crawford displaced with the fake vendor contracts, Logan said. The legitimate businesses he cut out. We've already identified 14 of them, Victoria said. We're reinstating their contracts where the relationship is still viable. 3 of them have already signed. She paused. 2 of them told me they'd spent 2 years not understanding why they'd lost the account. They thought they'd done something wrong. They need to know they didn't, Logan said. They know now, she said. He nodded, then he said, I'll take the role. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not relief exactly. The more complicated thing that happens when a decision you've been uncertain about resolves in the direction you were hoping for. She'd been holding this conversation carefully for a week, and he could see that she'd genuinely prepared herself for him to say no. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. I'm going to be difficult to manage. I figured, she said, and for the first time since Logan had known her, she smiled in a way that wasn't composed or measured or calibrated for a room. Just a real smile, with some tiredness in it and something lighter underneath. The acquisition ceremony took place on a Thursday morning, 72 hours after it had originally been scheduled. The delay had been explained to the press and the acquisition team as a standard extension for final documentation review. Technically accurate, stripped of context, the kind of statement that is not a lie and is also not the whole truth. Victoria had wrestled with this, Logan knew. She'd told him the night before that she wanted to say more, that it felt dishonest to hold a ceremony as though the week before hadn't happened. He'd told her the full story has a time and a place. The federal case needs to develop before parts of it can be public. Protecting the employees who are still waiting for their back pay means not blowing the legal case before it closes. There's a difference between a lie and a timing decision. She'd listened to him and hadn't completely agreed and had ultimately accepted it, which seemed like the right relationship to have with a hard thing. The ceremony was held in the flagship. The main floor had been arranged with chairs, not the event design kind with organza and centerpieces, just chairs, in rows, the way you'd set up a room where something real was going to happen. The mezzanine level was open and seated. Logan stood along the wall at the back of the main floor, out of the way, holding a cup of coffee that Priya had handed him on his way in. The acquisition team was there, Holt and his partners, the senior legal and financial leads. The board was seated in the front row. Eleanor Marsh looked exactly as she always looked, composed, attentive, slightly formidable. The room held roughly 110 people, which included a contingent of Sterling Grounds employees, baristas, shift supervisors, roasting staff, who had been personally invited by Victoria and given the morning off work with full pay to be present. Priya was seated 4 rows from the front. She'd come in wearing her regular clothes rather than her work uniform, which was the kind of detail that mattered to her and that Logan understood without needing to ask. Victoria spoke for 22 minutes. She didn't use notes. Logan hadn't expected her to. She started not with the acquisition, but with the company's origins. The corner shop, the 600 square feet, the 2 people who'd built the first roasting system with their own hands and their own savings, and an argument about thermal relay configuration that turned out to be one of them being right and the other eventually admitting it. She named Rachel, she named Logan, and she looked toward the back of the room when she said his name, and about 60 people turned to look at him, which he found uncomfortable and endured. She talked about what a company is supposed to be, not in the abstract language of mission statements, not the polished version that looks good on an investor deck. She talked about it the way people talk about things they've had to learn the hard way, with the specific understanding that comes from having seen what it looks like when it fails. A company is a promise, she said, a promise to the people who work in it that the hours they give and the skill they bring and the wages they earn will be treated with the same honesty they bring to the work itself. When that promise is broken, she said, it isn't just a legal failure or a financial scandal. It's a betrayal of something that most people can't afford to have betrayed. She paused for a moment. The room was very quiet. She said that Sterling Grounds had broken that promise, that during a period when its leadership should have been protecting the people who built it every morning, it had instead allowed a structure of theft to operate unchallenged for years. She did not characterize the employees who'd lost wages as victims, because she knew most of them didn't see themselves that way, and she wasn't going to define them by what had been done to them. She said instead that they had been owed something and not given it, and that fixing that was the company's obligation, not its generosity. Back pay processing had been completed for 691 Pacific Division employees as of that morning. The remaining 121 were in process, with completion expected within the week. Every person receiving a back pay distribution had also received a direct line of contact for questions and disputes, staffed by human beings, open for 60 days. Holt, from the acquisition team's front row seat, looked like a man who had prepared for a celebratory ceremony and found himself in something more complicated. He was taking notes. His expression was attentive in the way of someone recalibrating a significant assessment. Victoria talked about accountability without performing it. No theatrical self-flagellation, no carefully staged emotion. She said the company had failed. She said the people responsible were being held accountable through appropriate legal channels. She said Sterling Grounds was choosing transparency over reputation management, and that this was not a generous choice or a brave choice. It was simply the right one and therefore the only one. Then she talked about the future, not with the breathless optimism of an acquisition pitch, with the tempered language of someone who understood that trust is rebuilt slowly and in small increments and not through announcements. She described the new oversight role, independent of regional authority, reporting directly to the board, focused on operational safety and human integrity. She didn't characterize Logan's role in dramatic terms. She said the company needed someone whose job it was to notice things, and that they'd found the right person. She said near the end, this acquisition is not a finish line. It is a set of resources that we intend to use in the direction of the company's original purpose, which was to make something worth drinking and pay the people who make it what they're actually owed. She said it simply, without emphasis. It was the most honest thing Logan had heard in a corporate context in 15 years. The room was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then Holt began to applaud, which was interesting given that the speech had implicitly included a fairly direct accounting of everything his due diligence had missed. After him, the rest of the room followed, and the applause lasted long enough to be genuine rather than ceremonial. Logan didn't applaud. He stood against the wall with his coffee and watched the room and thought about a woman who had sat across a kitchen table from him 14 years ago, arguing correctly about thermal relay configuration. He thought she would have approved of this morning. Not the way the room looked, not the ceremony, not the speeches. The specific, unglamorous fact that 800 people were getting back what they were owed. Rachel had always cared most about the specific facts, the abstract stuff, legacy, vision, impact. She found those words exhausting. What mattered to her was whether the thing in front of you was true, and whether the people around you were treated fairly, and whether you were doing your actual job or performing it. Logan understood, standing in the back of that room, that he had spent 4 years since leaving Sterling Grounds doing something that looked like moving on and was actually something closer to waiting. Not for an opportunity, not for a moment of vindication, just waiting for a problem that required exactly what he had. The patience to observe without reacting, the knowledge to read a system no one else understood, the specific stubbornness of someone who knew what a thing was supposed to be and couldn't pretend otherwise when it wasn't. He wasn't sure that was a virtue. He'd have been more used to Ava over those 4 years if he'd been a little less stubborn and a little more willing to let things go. He knew that. The weight of it was something he carried and didn't talk about and probably wouldn't ever fully put down. But he was here now. That was the thing about showing up. It was always late, and it was always the only option you actually had. The documents were signed at 11:40 a.m. Holt and Victoria across a table in the private event room upstairs. Eleanor and the acquisition team's legal lead as witnesses, the board present. The transaction formalized in the language of people who spend their professional lives turning consequential things into clean paperwork. Logan was not in the room for the signing. He was in the equipment room, running a final diagnostic check. Old habit, confirm the system is clean before you close the job. The readings came back exactly as they should, every number in its right place. He closed the laptop, put the notebook in the toolbox, and sat on the floor with his back against the wall for a few minutes. He thought about Ava's school project, the one she'd been working on that he hadn't seen yet. She'd texted him a photo the previous night, a small wooden structure she'd built in her elective workshop class, a scale model of a bridge design she'd read about in an engineering book she'd checked out of the library 2 months ago and renewed 4 times. The bridge in the photograph was imperfect in the ways that first attempts are imperfect. One side slightly uneven, one of the support joints visibly overcompensated with extra glue. But the structure was sound. He could see that from the photo. She'd understood the load distribution, had figured out on her own where the stress points were and reinforced them, had built something that would hold weight. He'd texted her back. "This is really good." She'd sent back, "I know." He smiled at the floor of the equipment room. There was something he'd been trying to articulate to himself for the better part of a week, something that kept appearing at the edges of his thinking during the long hours of overnight work and driving and sitting in parking structures and eating bad food at strange hours. He wasn't sure he could say it cleanly, but it was something like this. The things that matter most are never finished. You don't complete them, you tend to them. A company, a family, a child growing up, a system built with someone you loved. They require ongoing attention, ongoing honesty, ongoing willingness to notice when something has gone wrong and do the actual work of fixing it instead of looking away. This was not a comfortable truth. It would be easier if the things that mattered could be built once and left alone. But they couldn't, and the people who believed they could were the ones who woke up one day to find that what they thought they were protecting had been hollowed out while they weren't watching. Logan had looked away for 4 years. He'd had real reasons. He'd also, somewhere underneath those real reasons, been tired in a way that went deeper than fatigue. The exhaustion of someone who had lost his partner and his company and his footing in the same period and had done the necessary work of surviving it, and had quietly, without quite admitting it to himself, decided that the risk of caring that much about something again was more than he could take on. Ava had made that decision unsustainable. That was the thing about children. They required you to keep going not as performance but as actual fact. You had to keep going because they were watching and learning from what they saw, and what Logan wanted her to learn was not that the right response to loss and betrayal was to disengage from everything that mattered. He wanted her to learn what he was only now, at 37, beginning to understand himself. That the answer to things breaking down is to know how they work and be willing to fix them, and that this is not heroism, it is just the steady, unglamorous practice of giving a damn. He got up off the floor, picked up the toolbox. He had to get Ava from school at 3:15 p.m. She was outside when he pulled up, standing with Bex, mid-conversation, backpack half off one shoulder. She finished what she was saying to Bex, gave her a quick wave, and jogged over to the truck with the specific energy of someone who had something to tell. She got in, dropped the backpack, and turned to face him before he could say anything. Mrs. Carruthers showed my bridge design to the whole class today, she said, as an example of correct load-bearing principles. She said it with the particular combination of pride and casual dismissal that 12-year-olds deploy when they care very much about something and don't want to look like they care very much about something. I'm not surprised, Logan said. She said the reinforcing at the joint was intuitive, Ava said, which I looked up, and it means I did something right without being told to. I know what intuitive means, Logan said. I know you do. I was confirming that I know what it means. She settled back in the seat and looked out the windshield. Did everything go okay today? At the coffee place? Yeah, Logan said. He pulled out into traffic. It went okay? Are you done with the hard part? He thought about that question honestly, the way she deserved him to think about it. The hardest part, he said. There's still work to do. There's going to be work to do for a while. But the thing that was broken is fixed. She nodded, absorbing this. And you're going to keep working there? Yeah, he said. I am. She was quiet for a moment. He stopped at a light and watched the city move around them and waited for whatever came next from the person in the passenger seat who had more of her mother in her than she knew. I think that's good, Ava said finally. I think you should do things that are hard because you're good at it and it matters. She paused. Also because you get weird when you don't have a project. Logan looked at her. That's something Aunt Dana says, Ava added with the innocent delivery of someone deploying a nuclear device. He drove through the green light. Your Aunt Dana should mind her own business. She says that's not in her nature, Ava said. Logan let the laugh out. It came up from somewhere that hadn't been used much recently. Real, without effort, the kind that arrives before you've decided to have it. They drove the rest of the way home with the radio on low, and Ava telling him about the engineering book she wanted to get from the library and the fact that Bex was thinking about joining the same elective next semester and the way the bridge test had worked, how they'd stacked textbooks on it until Mrs. Carruthers called it, and the bridge had held all of them. He listened to all of it. When they got home, Logan found the bicycle pump in the storage closet, went out to the backyard in the October afternoon light, and filled the rear tire on Ava's bike. He checked the brake cables while he was at it, adjusted the tension on the rear derailleur, which had been slightly off for weeks, and wiped down the frame with a rag. Ava appeared in the back doorway while he was finishing. You didn't have to do all that, she said. I know, he said. She leaned against the doorframe and watched him work. He could feel her looking at him the way she sometimes did, the particular attention of someone cataloging something they weren't sure they'd always have. He'd noticed her doing this more in the past year. He understood what it was. She was 12 and her mother had been gone for 4 years, and she had worked out, as children work out the things adults don't say directly, that people leave and things end, and you should look carefully while they're here. He understood it because he did the same thing. He stood up, tested the tire pressure with his thumb, and pronounced it good. He set the pump against the fence and looked at the bike and then at his daughter. Go try it, he said. She came down the back steps, got on the bike, and rode it down the length of the narrow yard and back. The tire held. The brakes caught cleanly. The rear derailleur shifted through its range without catching. She stopped beside him and looked at the bike for a moment. Then she looked at him. Good, she said, with the exact simplicity of someone for whom that word meant exactly what it meant and nothing additional. Good, he agreed. They went inside. Logan made dinner. Nothing complicated. Pasta and a sauce from what was in the refrigerator, the kind of meal that required some attention, but not so much that you couldn't talk while you made it. Ava sat at the kitchen table with the engineering book she'd brought home and read aloud occasional facts that she found interesting, not asking whether he was listening because she knew he was. The apartment smelled like garlic and warmth. Outside, the city moved through its evening transition. Somewhere a few blocks over, the Sterling Grounds flagship was beginning its closing sequence. Priya and the evening crew running their end-of-day protocols, the original roasting system cycling down from its afternoon production run, every component performing exactly as it had been designed to perform, exactly as the woman who'd argued for the thermal relay configuration had intended it to. Logan stirred the sauce and listened to his daughter read about tensile strength and thought that this, the ordinary life of a man doing the next right thing, was not a consolation prize for something grander. It was, in fact, the whole point. Strong things are built slowly. They are maintained by people who pay attention. They fail when those people stop. And they can be rebuilt, even after failure, by someone who remembers what they were supposed to be. That was all. That was enough.